Hey friends, welcome to the latest Vox Conversation. I'm your host, Matt Popovits. If this is your first time tuning in with us, just a quick reminder that VoxCon exists to help you grow in your creativity, thrive in your calling. Because we believe that when you thrive in your calling, you not only experience greater personal joy, but you bring great things into the world. And in this series of Vox Conversations, we're talking to leaders, artists, and entrepreneurs who can help you do just that. And today we're excited to welcome Mike Pacchione. Mike has helped people from Microsoft, Nike, Google, and a lot of other companies and endeavors that you've heard of excel in their communication. Mike, thank you so much for joining us in this Vox Conversation.
Hey, my pleasure, Matt.
We're really excited to have you with us, and in particular for you to teach us how to communicate in this new world that we find ourselves in, where we have to do, well, exactly what we're doing right now, where we have to communicate in a virtual setting. We're excited to have you share with us.
I know, it's so funny. This is a virtual presentation about virtual presentations. So meta.
It is so meta, but you're the perfect guy to lead us through this. So Mike, the floor is all yours.
All right, thank you very much. Yeah, y'all, this is a virtual presentation about virtual presentations. So I spent about 7 years flying all over the world helping people with presenting, trained over 10,000 people. You've probably heard before the number one fear amongst people is public speaking. I don't actually know how accurate that is. Like, I have trouble believing that someone in a den of vipers is just sitting there and they're like, well, at least I'm not giving a presentation right now. That seems unlikely to me. But point remains, it's a big thing. So I trained about 10,000 people on public speaking. And by far, the number one question that I received was this: do you have any tips for presentation anxiety? So that's like every single person I trained asked that. But do you know what no one ever asked? No one ever asked, do you have any tips for curbing anxiety when I'm presenting virtually? So people, I mean, it was pretty regular for people to say, do you have tips for presenting virtually? But nobody ever fessed up to having anxiety when presenting virtually. I can't help but think that's because on some level, we feel like that's a lesser presentation. But y'all, here's the thing. The stakes are actually higher for virtual presentations. They're higher for virtual presentations. Think of how easy it is for people to check out. Think of how easy it is for you to check out right now. Think of how easy it is for a dog to walk in front of you and then you're distracted. The stakes are higher for virtual presentations. But here's the great news. If you master virtual presentations, this can take your career to the next level. So listen, I could speak about this for hours and hours, but nobody wants me to speak for hours and hours when it's virtual. In fact, that's one of the points that I'm going to make. I've got 5 tips for you on upping your virtual presentation game. Candidly, if you can embrace 1, 2, or 3 of these, you're going to be gold. So 5 tips we're going to go through. First is make it digestible. Second, make your thoughts concise. Third, make it seem normal. Fourth, make it about the problem. Fifth, make it like a kid's book. I'm going to double click on all of these. We're going to go through pretty quickly, and then we're going to call it good. All right, first thing, make it digestible. That's a fancy way of saying make the presentation shorter than you usually would. I'm going to put a screenshot on the screen. This is a church I go to. Last several sermons on the podcast, you will notice the times on these: 24 minutes, 20 minutes, 22 minutes. That's because those are all virtual. Clicking to another slide, let's take a look at what they were pre-COVID when everything was face-to-face. 38, 37, 41, hour 4, 45, 42. Do you see the difference? Just think about this. Like, think about it. There's a reason why TED Talks are short. Even when watching TED Talks, my guess is there are probably times where you're sitting there and you're like, man, 18 minutes, this feels like an eternity. But y'all, like, seriously, how do you feel when you see that a video is an hour long? Just when you go to YouTube or something, you see that little on the bottom left, says an hour, hour 4. I mean, that's like strap in, right? That's why we need to make our presentations shorter, because people have that feeling. I'm taking this course right now. I paid $3,000 to take this course. And one of the bonuses is there's this woman who's like so good. And she does webinars where you submit questions and she'll answer them. And when you miss that, there's a replay. Awesome. It's an hour 40. The replay is an hour 40. I can't tell you how good this woman is at her job. She's been published all over the place. She went to Columbia, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. As soon as I see that hour 40, I'm like, so tip number one, make it digestible, make it short. Aim for something to be 30 minutes or less. Even if you have an hour-long time slot, make it shorter. So first tip was to make it digestible. Second one, make your thoughts concise. Make your thoughts concise. How do I want to say this? The virtual audience is real. They are really there. On the other end of this camera, as much as presenting virtually might not produce the same anxiety as being in a room with 100 people, 1,000 people looking at you, you might have more looking through the camera. And I think a lot of us lose sight of that. But because that's true, we need to think about what it's like to be on the other side of the camera. When you're presenting in person, like let me make an analogy for you. When you're presenting in person, when you're on stage, that produces anxiety. So anxiety is to on stage as virtual is to meandering. The most likely problem that you will have when you're presenting virtually is that you will meander when you speak. Like this is almost I can almost guarantee this is what's going to happen. You're going to be presenting. This is a subject I know, this is a subject I know. And in the back of my head, because I can't see the audience, even if it's on Zoom, I can't totally see. People aren't like super engaged on Zoom, big smiles on their faces. In the back of your head, you're going to be thinking to yourself, did they get it? Did they get it? And most of us will think, well, let me just explain it some more. No, pretty please, with sugar on top. Do not do that. Err on the side of a shorter explanation. If it helps, sometimes I literally in my head, I picture someone's typing out what I'm saying. Like they're transcribing what I'm saying. And it'd be pretty easy for them to transcribe something and it looks like this. And y'all, usually when you're presenting, it just needs to be this. So it does not need to be that lengthy email with no spaces. It just needs to be shorter. So one of the things that you can do to make yourself better at this is to err, yes, on the side of a shorter explanation, but also on the side of more slides. Let me say that again. Short explanation, but more slides. So the rule here is more slides with less on them. More slides with less on them. If you can think of each slide as just being a sentence or two, not a slide needs to be a 5-minute explanation, you'll be in much better shape. So divorce yourself from thinking a slide equals a certain amount of time. Treat slides almost like you're creating a flip book. So no, a lot of people have heard, well, okay, well in a presentation, it's an hour-long presentation, so you get 10 slides. Like the number of slides shouldn't matter. My guess is right now, if I asked you how many slides you've seen, you'd probably be like, 3. This is slide 24. Slides should not take that long to go through. It should be a short explanation on each slide. So that's the idea of making your thoughts concise. Err on the side of a shorter explanation, 1 or 2 sentences per slide, more slides rather than less. So third tip is to make it seem normal. Make it seem normal. Huh? Of course, why wouldn't I want to make it seem normal? Well, this is referring to the way that you design the room. So y'all, the virtual audience is real. There's actually someone on the other side of the camera right now. For some reason, we forget that the camera can see both ways. We forget that the camera can see both ways. In this section, I want to talk about some of the technology and the way that you set up the room. So first thing is the camera angle. I don't know if you're like me. Do you have parents, or maybe this is actually you. This is not your parents, but my parents have no idea how FaceTime works. I've explained it. This is what it looks like when my dad is FaceTiming. Straight up the nostrils. Now you might say, okay, but Mike, I'm not 75 years old. I know better. And I thought that too. But the number of people who set up their camera so that they're not looking straight ahead, so that you're getting a double chin shot, it's crazy. I was flipping through the channels last week. This is James Carville, Democratic strategist, major Democratic strategist. That's what he looked like. He had his camera set up that way. Flip through the next channel. There was a guy talking through football, straight on. There's a reason why the news doesn't show the camera down there. We want you to be looking straight on. So I know that feels really obvious, but I can't believe how many people I have seen flub that. Now, if you're sitting there and you're like, okay, but how do I do that? Your audience doesn't need to know what your setup looks like in the room. A lot of times the answer is as simple as prop your computer up on a box. Prop your computer up on a box. But we want to be looking straight ahead, not down, not up where you're seeing my chin. We want to be looking straight ahead. That is what feels normal. You should also consider your backgrounds. And I was a little jealous seeing Matt's backgrounds because he's got like the cool wood setup. I'm always self-conscious about like what books people are looking at behind me. Your background doesn't need to be like this awesome Matt Popovich setup. But what it does need to do is to not be distracting the audience. There was a funny sequence this year. So at the NFL draft, first time ever, they were not all in the same place, of course. They were doing it virtually. The Raiders coach, John Gruden, the whiteboard behind him literally had listed out the Raiders draft board. So in other words, they had, this is the guy we want the most, second most, third most, fourth most. He had all of that behind him. Think through what is in your background. Like every other team could see. Here's the Raiders wanted the most, second most, third most, all the way. Think about what's in your background. And that also goes for your desktop. I'm going to click through some slides. I mean, it's been interesting. There are a lot of people who are having to present virtually and they're not accustomed to it. So I've tried to pay attention to this on Twitter when people are saying things about their teachers or new presentations that they're in. One of the people that I follow, or I got a link to this somehow, she's like, in my first Zoom class, the professor just started a screen share and one of her folders is just in all caps, divorce. Don't believe me? Here it is. Y'all, think through that stuff that's on your desktop. Feels obvious, we forget it all the time. And that also goes for lighting. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a presentation and I'm watching someone and they look like it's a hostage footage. I mean, like this, right? Does that feel weird to you? But people present that way. Don't present that way. So think through the lighting that you're using. Think through the lighting you're using. I realize we don't all have like these awesome studios at home, but we should be able to clearly see your face. And making everything seem normal should also revolve around sitting or standing. What do you do when you actually present? You stand. What do most people do when they are presenting virtually? They sit. And they don't just sit, they sit really close. And if I'm sitting really close, there are a couple of things that are going wrong. Number one, my face is probably taking up half the screen right now. Number two, and this is more subtle, you can't see my hand gestures. And gestures are essential. So a woman by the name of Vanessa Van Edwards, a social scientist, Vanessa Van Edwards, she studied the amount of gestures that were used in the most popular TED Talks. So she had a whole population of people take a look at gestures from the most popular take a look at the most popular TED Talks, the least popular TED Talks, turn the volume off. And just by turning the volume off and seeing people's gestures, they could predict, did this TED Talk take off or not take off? I believe the number was 465 gestures in viral TED Talks. So why am I bringing this up right now? In a virtual presentation, we need to see your hands. We need to see your hands. And it doesn't have to be like you're working everything out and you don't have to freak out if like your hand goes off screen, but we need to see your hands. So when you're setting up your room, try to set up back a little bit. We don't need to see, your camera doesn't have to pick us up head to toe, but we should be able to see your gestures. When you do that, your audience will trust you more. Your audience will trust you more. So make it digestible, make your thoughts concise, make it seem normal. And next tip, make it about the problem. Make it about the problem. This is about how to start a presentation. Okay. Here's how not to start a presentation. And this is like what everybody's doing. And I get why it happens. 5 words that will push your audience away right from the beginning. Can everyone hear me okay? Can everyone hear me okay? You don't have to say that. Y'all, unless you are presenting to 8th graders, Your audience will let you know when technology is going wrong. 8th graders probably won't, but your audience will let you, like, just trust that your audience will let you know if the technology goes wrong. So just start. Just start. Go straight into the pool. Just start. That's the most common mistake that people make with intros. The second most common mistake that people make, and I should say with virtual introductions, the second most common mistake that people make, well, let me tell you a story about it. Once upon a time, one of my friends from college, through a bizarre sequence of events, got married at a major celebrity's property in New Jersey. As a courtesy, they decided to invite this guy to their wedding. Never thought he'd show up. But like an hour into the rehearsal dinner, he shows. Nobody's expecting that. The room parts. Nobody told him to come to the front and give a speech, but it just seemed natural. I guess when there's a major celebrity that walks in, you just naturally think to yourself, he should talk right now. So he comes to the front of the room. Now, you would think that at someone's rehearsal dinner, you might, when giving a speech, you might congratulate the bride and groom. Seems natural? Not what he did. He spoke for 10 minutes about, isn't this a great property? Let me give you the history of all of it. Welcome, welcome. Nothing about the bride and groom. I bring this up because that's a trap that is really easy to fall into. It's really easy to fall into the trap of beginning your presentation with basically a resume recital. Don't do that. Your audience doesn't need to know, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. What you should do instead is start with the problem. You'll notice that I did that at the beginning of this presentation. You can say a little bit about, I have this experience, but it has to be framed in terms of solving the problem. It can't be, my name is Mike, I've been at this company, this company, this company, this company. I train this person, this person, this person, this person. It needs to be, I have this experience solving this problem, which is the problem you have. So pretty please, with sugar on top. When you're putting together a virtual presentation, make it about the problem, not about your background. Make it about the problem. Which leads us to our last tip. Make it like a kid's book. Here's me reading a book to my son. Pout Pout Fish. We love reading this book. This is almost every day, although he's begun to shift a little bit. There's a new contender in the children's book. He loved this one called Peekabroos. I'll keep an eye out for you. I bring this up because being able to read a kid's book is crucial to the way that you present out loud. So like, let me impersonate how most people present in a virtual environment. Most people will say they'll present like this. My name is Mike. I'm very excited to present to you today. And my subject is blah, 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 blah. Like, do you hear the lack of enthusiasm in my voice? When we're presenting, we need to get back in the mindset as if we were reading to a child. So like, I'm going to put on the screen, here's some text from the Pout Pout Fish. And like, this is how I read it to Luca. I'm a pout pout fish with a pout pout face, so I spread the dreary wearies all over the place. Blub, blub, blub. Now, it would feel a little weird to like go to that level when I'm presenting in a business presentation, when I'm presenting from the pulpit, wherever you might be presenting. But do you know how most people would say that? Metaphorically speaking, the way that most people present virtually, there would be no emotion whatsoever. There would be no energy whatsoever. It would sound like, I'm a pout pout fish with a pout pout face, and I spread the dreary wearies all over the place. Blub, blub, blub. Like, that's what most people sound like. So one of the tricks here, some people just need that reminder, oh, you're right, I totally do that. I just don't think through it. Other people, you maybe don't think that way right now. So one of the tricks here is in the notes section of PowerPoint or Keynote, Google Slides, whatever you use, one of the things you can do is simply to highlight the words that you want to say louder or softer, louder or softer. But the point here is that we need to get into our storytelling mindset. Like, pretend you're reading a book to your child, or pretend that you are around the campfire and you're telling a story. That's how it has to feel to your virtual audience, because the virtual audience is real. And they are contending, and you are contending with everything else that's going on around them. The things in their house, the tabs that they can click through, the email they can return to. The virtual audience is real, and in your voice, you need to bring them to pay attention to you. So one of the questions that I always ask people is like, okay, when you're on stage, you can tell if your presentation has gone well. While you're presenting, you can look at the audience and you can see people nodding along. You can see people leaning forward in their seat. It doesn't really work that way over Zoom, WebEx, whatever you use. So how do you know if it's good? Okay. Because I mean, people aren't going to write that in the chat. Like, doing great, Mike. How do you know if it's good? Here's where I think you need to channel your inner Jimmy Fallon. When the Tonight Show was first going to go virtual, there were a bunch of articles like this that were published. Headline: Jimmy Fallon has been laughing at jokes his whole career to prepare for this exact moment. Y'all, I'm giving you permission to do something. I'm giving you permission to laugh at your own jokes. I'm giving you permission to smile. I'm giving you permission to enjoy yourself. Because your audience will follow the emotions you are demonstrating. So if you seem nervous, audience is going to seem nervous. You seem like you don't care, audience isn't going to care. You seem like this presentation is great, audience will think the presentation's great. It needs to actually be great, but the audience will follow your emotions. That's the point. So how do I know if it's good? You have to present as if you know it's good. So instead of tap dancing in, being, well, okay, let me just see. But did they think it's funny? Oh, I can't tell because it's virtual. You have to assume it's funny. You have to assume the points matter. Said another way, be the emotion you wish to see in the world. Be the emotion you wish to see in your, let me say that differently. Be the emotion you wish to see in your audience. Be the emotion you wish to see in your audience. So y'all, we just went through those 5 tips. Let's bring it home. One of the consequences of COVID, of course, is that all these people had to deal with haircuts. Very trying thing. People from World War II, I'm sure, would have a lot of sympathy for us. We had to deal with haircuts. This is my barber. Brian's the one in the middle right there. He's my favorite barber I have ever had. That barbershop's about a mile from where I live, but I could live 20 miles away and I would drive there, maybe 50. And there are a few reasons why. First, Brian never engages in the small talk that everybody else does. But more relevant to this conversation, Brian knows exactly what haircut I should have. When you go to a new barber, I don't know if everybody has this experience or not, but when you go to a new barber, at least this is what my experience has been. You walk in and they're like, okay, well, how do you want it done? I don't know. I want a little taken off. Okay, like a 2, a 3, a 4? What are these numbers? What does it mean? I have no idea what these numbers mean. They may as well be asking like what titanium alloy I need to use for welding. I have no idea, but Brian knows exactly how I want my haircut. So I get to walk in there and just say, hey, Brian, can you give me the usual? And a couple weeks ago, I was able to do just that. The things have reopened. He knew exactly what I wanted. And y'all, that is the dream that we all have for communication. We'd all love to be able to walk in and say the usual. We'd all love to be able to walk in and say, well, you know what to do already. That's really what we always want to happen. We always want this idea in our head to perfectly translate to your head. But unfortunately, like, that's not how it works. That doesn't work in a keynote. I can't just walk out on stage in a keynote and say, here's the usual. You know what I want to say. You know what I mean. A pastor who's doing like an exegesis from stage, like, they would love to be able to walk out there and say, well, you know what this passage is about. It doesn't work that way. And this stuff is hard. But it does work when you think through what it's like to be on the other side of the screen. It does work when you think through and you care enough to set up the design of your room so that we're face to face. It does work when you go through more slides rather than less. It does work when you are concise. It does work when you make the presentation short. It does work It does work. It does work. It works when you show the audience how they should feel. It works what you think when you think about what it must be like to be them. And with that, y'all, this has been really fun for me. I hope it has been for you too. One of the things I'm going to put together for you, and I'll put a slide on the screen. You can download these tips. So I'll put all that together for you. You can download these tips right here on the website. Y'all, here's the great thing. The bar for presentations is really low, and it's even lower for virtual ones. Most people aren't good at this, and most people never try to get better. So if you can choose one, two, if you can choose one of the tricks that I've gone through and embrace it, like that will make all the difference for you. Good luck.
Mike, thank you so much. That was funny, informative, and just crazy practical. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Oh, I should have had you like type LOL in the chat. That's how we can get around it.
Well, trust me, people were laughing, man. And also, you know, I'm a presenter myself, and I'm listening to you, and I'm taking notes. I'm texting someone else who's listening into the conversation, saying, "This is so good. This is so practical." So thank you so much. And what I want to do is just kind of, to use your own phrase, kind of double click on some of these things and throw some questions at you.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things you said that stuck out to me was that you should embody the emotion you want to see in the world or from your audience.
Yeah.
And right now we're in a time where I think what people want to have is confidence. They want to have a sense of peace because of all the craziness and uncertainty that's happening in the world. How important right now as a communicator, when the stakes are high and everybody's anxious, how important now is that sense of confidence as a presenter?
Yeah, that's huge. If you can put the audience at ease, that makes all the difference in the world. Because the audience can see through someone who's insecure. The audience can see through someone who is flat out nervous. And what they want, this is literally why people are called leaders. They want to be able to follow someone. So if you can show, both in the way that you speak and in the way that you stand, if you can show that like, this is going to be okay, that is huge. That's huge.
How do you create an emotional connection with your audience when so much of the human cues that we receive when speaking in public simply aren't there?
Yeah.
How do you create that kind of that feeling of we are really connected as human beings, even though we're not in the same room or perhaps even in the same state?
Yeah, totally. So there's some tactical things you can do. I mean, the chat room is nice. You can have people unmute. Kind of depends on what sort of presenting you're doing. So those things are helpful. Breakout, if you have a large group, like breakout rooms with smaller groups are strangely fun, or at least can be strangely fun. Those things are all good. But some people who are listening to this are like, yeah, but I'm presenting to 500 people or 1,000. Like I can do a breakout room, 1,000 people, totally. So what you need to do there is find someone, or maybe it's a few different people, who represents your ideal audience. Or let me say that differently. The people who are going to be in the room, someone who represents, let's say this well, someone who represents the type of audience member that will be in the room. Now, you might have a situation where it's like, but there are 3 distinct audience members. Totally cool. Choose someone who is going to represent audience 1, audience 2, audience 3. And then you really, really think through their world and speak as if you were speaking to them. So it's like, I might be thinking of my wife. I might be thinking of my friend Sam. I might be thinking of my brother. And if I just think to myself, oh, this part's for Sam. If I'm really thinking of Sam as a person and I've assessed my audience correctly, that should trickle down to like an actual audience.
What are your thoughts on kind of the age-old debate when it comes to public speaking between notes and no notes, between memorized and manuscript as it relates to virtual presentation?
Yeah, here's what I'll say. You can set things up to the point where you can have the speech almost a teleprompter in front of you. And if you practice, you can read that almost seamlessly. Now, having said that, you don't really need that. I mean, it's pretty rare that a speech needs to be delivered perfectly as written. And most people who are writing speeches are not Shakespeare. So my advice to people is always like, if you've turned a phrase that's perfect, write that down, put that as a slide so that there's no way for you to forget it. But for most of the talk, like the bigger thing is, have you thought through the flow? Does the flow make sense? And are you able to speak through the flow without meandering? Because like I said, meandering is the biggest issue.
What's the single best piece of advice you've received from someone as a public speaker?
I don't know if I got this advice or if I figured it out on my own, but like it's meant to be fun. And obviously there are presentations where that won't work, but even if it's not fun, it's meant to have energy. And it's being on stage is a place where you can be creative. It's a place where your personality come out. Like those are really good things. And your audience is counting on you for it, frankly. I think this isn't the question you asked exactly, but I think where a lot of people get tripped up is they feel like when they come on stage, and if they just even listening to this, they heard my advice, like demonstrate the emotion you want the audience to have. To some people that's going to translate to acting, and to an extent it is. But if you're just going to walk out on stage and say, well, I don't want to have energy in my voice. That's not true to who I am. And this is the volume at which I speak. You're actually being selfish. And the presentation is meant to be about the audience and helping the audience. It's not meant to be all about you. So as best we can, we need to put ourselves in deference to the audience. And that's true in what you write. That's true with the information you're presenting. And that's true in the way that you're presenting it. Like it's about the audience, not about you.
Yeah.
As much as it might not feel that way, it's about the audience, not about you.
Yeah. You mentioned at the outset that the most common question you get is how to deal with public speaking anxiety. Yeah. And right now I'm going to venture a guess that, especially in the early stages of this transition to virtual that pastors and public speakers and all types of presenters made, there was even more anxiety as people tried to figure out how to do this thing they do in another setting on this setting, especially given the fact that what we are having to talk about these days, not just with COVID, but with what's happening with conversations around human rights. There's a lot, not only a new format, but there is a very urgent conversation in this new format that's taking place. All those things can, I would imagine, ramp up the anxiety. What are some practical things that you're aware of that a presenter can do to deal with the anxiety of stepping in front of an audience or a camera?
Yeah, totally. So one of the big ones is realizing the audience is rooting for you. You can probably think of an exception to that, but it's pretty rare. I don't know, Matt, have you ever been in an audience and you're like, I hope this guy screws up? Yeah, stutter over that line. I mean, nobody's doing that. So politicians, maybe when there's a politician speaking, but for most of us who are giving speeches that aren't running for office, your audience is rooting for you. They don't realize that they're rooting for you and try to speak to them as if they're a friend. That should help quite a bit.
Yeah.
If you are presenting in something that's higher stakes, if you're leading a company right now, one of the biggest things that you can do is to demonstrate to your audience that either you have a plan or you are figuring out a plan. There's this one executive I work with, and when all these companies were coming out with Black Lives Matter type statements that they were emailing out, he wanted to do that for his company. So he wrote up, or him and his team wrote up what their values were as a company. And I took a look at it and I was like, man, I like these values, but there's no plan behind this. So it's great that one of your values is compassion and respect, but how are you going to do that? Because the audience is looking for someone who has a plan.
Yeah.
So I just think for people who are in that high stakes position, you need to demonstrate that there's a plan or you're working on a plan and here's how to communicate it. Because the audience can handle, your audience can handle some degree of uncertainty if it seems like you have a handle on the situation.
Yeah. It's interesting that you're starting to see a bit of that and feel a bit of that in the conversation that's happening publicly around around the big issues we're wrestling with. You see people and hear people saying things like, we don't want just rhetoric, we want results, right? We don't want the surface level recognition of the problem. We want people who say, here's what I'm going to do about my contribution to this problem and how we're going to change that. And then that's what people want to hear from their public speakers about whatever problem they're bringing into that forum, right?
Yeah, totally. It's like, but I do go back to it, Matt. Like not every presentation has to be, here's the solution. Sometimes it can be an update, but your audience in high stakes stuff, they want to know that you're working on something. They want to know that you care and that you're coming up with a plan, or here's how the plan is going. And when things fall apart, or when someone doesn't seem like they have a plan, they don't seem like they care, or they seem like they care more about personal reputation than that of the audience. And that's a lot of people, sadly. I mean, I think we're seeing it. Like, this is a crisis point. And a lot of the leaders of politicians, of companies, they got to that point because they were good at campaigning, or they were good at what they did, but they were not good at leading. And there are lots of people suffering for that right now.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say to someone who is struggling with assessing how they're doing as a speaker? Is there something we can do to analyze our own effectiveness and take an honest look at our presentations and assess them and get better?
Yeah, totally. So number one, you can hire a coach. That's a good thing. But if you want to do it yourself, great thing to do too. Most people don't want to do this, but watch yourself on film. You have no idea. You thought you were way more enthusiastic than you really were. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm doing the same hand gesture over and over and over again. You have no idea. And I can't tell you how many times, Matt, where I've said to someone, because when I coach people, I will often stop them in the moment. I'll be like, Matt, I need you to do that part louder. Does it again. No, Matt, like, you're at a 5, I need you to be at an 8. Does it again. Actually, let me just tell you the story, because this is hilarious. Okay, so there's this guy I was coaching. We're sitting in a round table. So there were like 8 people getting coached, but every person speaks one at a time, right? So this guy, Sean, is speaking. And he, like, first round, he was pretty good. Wasn't stumbling over words, seemed pretty composed and confident. Like, he's what you want. There's just no voice modulation when he's speaking. So that's like the one thing he had to work on. But I'm thinking to myself, this guy's gonna be pretty good. So we go to round 2, and I'm like, okay, Sean, this time I want you to, at key moments, I want you to emphasize that with your voice. So I want you to either speak louder or softer with your voice. So he tries to go louder, and he delivers it the exact same way. Goes a 3rd time, exact same way. 4th time around, I'm like, okay, Sean, I want you to pretend like you're really angry at something. He's like, well, I don't really get angry. And then everybody else in the group just starts throwing out things that everybody would get angry. Someone cut you off in traffic. You stepped on a Lego. He's like, nope. He's just block. I'm like, okay, let's do this differently. Let's have you, instead of turning the volume up, let's turn it down. Okay. And you know what? Let's remove work from the equation. You can say any sentence in the world. What do you want to say? He's like, I love cookies. I'm like, all right, I love cookies. You're going to say that out loud. Now, what's the most important word in that sentence? He said it's cookies. It actually should be love, but that was whatever. That's fine. I'm like, okay. So when you get to cookies, I want you to turn the volume down. So he's like, I love cookies. As if it were a dirty word. I bring this up just because I'm trying to get him to turn the volume up, and he thought he was, and he couldn't. And people in the group are like, no, sound angry. You just stubbed your toe. Da, da, da. He couldn't turn the volume up. But he never knew that about himself. So I didn't keep in touch with him. I don't know what happens with him. But if you're trying to get better, it's helpful to know where you're starting. And most of us don't have an accurate thought.
And you're right. It's hard for people to watch themselves on film. It's a really self-conscious thing, but we have to remember, if we're asking other people to sit through this and we're not willing to do it ourselves, like, what kind of mean person are we? Like, I would never listen to me, but you should all listen to me.
Totally. I hadn't put in those words before, but that's perfect. Like, oh, no, I wouldn't sit through this, but you should. The 20 of you should. Yeah.
definitely not good enough for me, but it's fine for you. So Mike, when it comes to people trying to find, people want to be an effective communicator, but, and you hinted at this, but being an effective communicator is about being comfortable in your own skin, so to speak, being relaxed and comfortable with who you are. And yet there's also a desire, especially in our community, to find, our community here at VoxCon, to find your unique voice and what it is that you as a communicator uniquely bring to a presentation. How does one discover kind of what their superpower is as a public speaker?
Yeah, so if you don't know that quickly, you need to ask other people. Because if you don't know that quickly, then what you're going to do is you're going to dwindle down the road of, well, I'm not that smart, I'm not that funny, I'm okay at math. Like, that's the way that you're going to start thinking. So what you need to do, truthfully, I've sent an email to 100 friends just saying, what are things you admire about me? What are things that you like about me? When you read through those responses, you should start to see patterns. That's not like, those answers aren't 100% of the time going to be able to translate on stage, right? Because it just sometimes it'll be like, you're a good listener. Well, you can't really be on stage just sitting there listening, right? But you're going to start to see patterns that you should be able to take from there and drop on stage. What your audience really wants you to be like, they want you to show up for a presentation as if you're at a cocktail party. And that's the way I always phrase it. And you've had one drink, to be clear. Like, this is not that kind of cocktail party, but that's who they want you to be. Most presentations, that's who your audience wants you to be, is who you are around your friends. They don't want, I mean, it is rare to find an audience that's like, I want the super stuffy professional guy.
Yeah.
And even, I can't tell you how many times I've gone to companies where they work in finance or a field like that, and they think that they need to be totally buttoned up, use really big jargon. Audience doesn't really want that. Like, I get if you don't want to bust out your wedding reception personality, but they want to see that you are a person. Your audience wants to see that. And they want to hear jokes that make you laugh. They want to hear you simplifying things. They don't want to hear you trying to sound as smart as you can possibly sound. They want you to, said another way, they want you to find your voice and bring it on stage. That's what your audience is looking for.
Yeah. I think it's a powerful image to say, you at a cocktail party with one drink. What immediately comes to mind for me is, I am casual, yet I am lacking, I'm not self-conscious.
Yeah.
And it's the more easygoing me, but still genuinely me. Yeah. And people can connect with that, right?
Yeah. And that's what your audience wants. They want to connect with that. They want the easygoing Matt. Yeah.
Well, Mike, this has been really helpful, really fantastic. Thank you so much for being with us. Where can we go to learn more about the work that you do and get more resources from you?
Yeah, Matt, first of all, thank you so much for having me. One of the things I always try to tell people, because I traveled around the world for 7 years, and I went to hundreds of different companies and really impressive ones and I bring that up just because you would think that at really impressive companies, everybody is like there for the mission, and that's not necessarily true. And a lot of people don't try to get better at this stuff. As I went from company to company, sometimes I would sit down for lunch or a break with someone. I would ask, like, what do you love about working here? And I'll never forget this one woman. Like, what's your favorite thing about working here? And she thinks for a second, and she kind of looks up. It's like, it's a good commute. What? It's a good commute. Like, you get one life. We're trying to find our path, find our purpose, follow the way. And her greatest thing that she does vocationally is it's a good commute. Now, she lived in LA, so it's maybe a little more forgivable, that answer, but man, oh man. So I bring this up just because, Matt, the work that you're doing in the group here, like, you are trying to get closer to the path that you're meant to be on and fulfill your calling. So thank you very much for having this. People, if you want to know more about me, my website is miketalks.co, miketalks.co. And again, if you want to download the guide for virtual presentations, miketalks.co/virtual.
Mike, thanks so much. I hope we can do this again. This was great.
Matt, I hope we can do this in person someday, my friend.
I know, right? Let's plan on it.
Yeah.
Let's plan on it.
Yeah, I know. I'm there.
Me too. And for you watching at home, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being part of these Vox Conversations. If you want to know more about VoxCon, you can head to our website, go to vox.com. You can also head to Matt Popovits, that's MattPopovits.com, and learn more about our ministry and what we try to do in this world and helping you find your voice and excel in your calling. You can also follow us on Facebook and YouTube and all the things. We're all over the place. We'd love to have you follow us. We'd love to have you be a part of our community. Thanks so much for tuning in. Until next time.